Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, doc, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajendran, for that introduction. I do not know whether actually I fit into that. I would not call myself as an experienced person. We are still in the beginning stage because our team members are being educated. Still, you would have seen them talking in the that grand rounds. So we have our own deficiencies, which I will also be pointing out in the due course. And when we spoke about this talk, ma'am said that primary prevention is being taken care of in general by various people. So let's talk about plant-based lifestyle in secondary prevention. So that's the idea of today's talk. So I'm going to give importance to these three things first. Places which have improved with whole food plant-based diet, and who are the pioneers in the field and the persons who are benefited. I'm sure everybody will be knowing these things, and a little bit of my own personal experience and some pearls. That's a summary. Well, this is something which is an interesting slide, which is a study published in Lancet in 2016. We all know that whenever we are asked about the cardiovascular risk factors, we talk about various things, but unfortunately not about the leading cause. So the leading cause is 56%. This is about the risk factors in India. This is pertaining to India, leading risk factors for cardiovascular diseases in India. This was published in 2016 in Lancet, which says 56% of the risk comes from the diet. And unfortunately, as a cardiologist, I have to admit that we almost never talk to the patient about diet. We talk about the routine risk factors like sugar, blood pressure, obesity, lipids, and of course, smoking. But look at this slide. Air pollution comes ahead of tobacco usage, which basically means we all should be prepared at one point of time to talk about diet and air pollution too, apart from the ones which we are already doing. And the second slide is even more important, and that's the reason why we are here. So whenever this is about the dietary risk factors for the NCDs, number of deaths at global level. This is what are the causes for CVD. So this is again a Lancet publication. And when we go to any routine physician or a cardiologist, we tend to hear this. The last 6 causes or 5-6 causes as the first few causes of dietary causes of heart disease. So when we go to a physician or a practitioner, we are advised not to take few things which are not actually the primary causes of heart disease. So what is more important, I'm sure all of you are aware of this. What is more important is what we don't take. So the leading causes will be the diet low in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, diet low in fiber, diet low in legumes. I think we should start teaching this from MBBS time onwards. Instead, we teach them about the food we take in higher amounts, like sugar sweetened beverages, meat. This is what we tend to teach. I think we should teach them positive stuff. Take more of few things. Okay. And this slide, this figure also impressed me very much. This is about the residual risk in primary and secondary prevention studies. So the residual risk ranges from 58 to 79% in various studies. That means you have treated the patient with statins in secondary prevention with antiplatelets, with beta blockers, with ACE inhibitors. Still, there is a risk. That risk ranges from 60 to 80%. That is the most surprising things. And we unfortunately start celebrating the statins, beta blockers, and ACE inhibitors. I'm not against these drugs. I do prescribe them in the highest dosage, tolerated dosage possible. But what is important is that we are leaving a huge residual risk by a conventional approach. That is the most important thing. And the fourth figure, which I would like to share is, again, this is something important. The one in the red is the conventional treatment, like in many of these studies. So the conventional treatment brings down the events by 20 to 40% only. But the lifestyle modification of the risk factors takes care of reduction in the death by around 50%. That is something very, very interesting. This is a post which is not being sponsored by anybody. There is no pharma industry or something to promote lifestyle modification, and that's possibly the reason. And of course, as Dr. Regina was talking, we are not exposed to them also. That's the main reason why we still continue to have IHT as the major contributor for the death across the globe. Okay, so I'm very sure all of you will be knowing the meaning of the word diet and where from it came. So diet is a word which was derived from the Greek word dieta, which basically means entire way of life. It's not just about the food, it's about the drink, exercise, and the lifestyle. So the focus is on lifestyle. Okay, there is nothing new in the world except the history that we do not know. This was a famous quote by Harry Truman. So it's important. Let's try to recollect some history. And the history, I think, always should start from war. Okay, war has always been looked upon in a negative way, but war has contributed a lot to health. Maybe I would say that the BP apparatus, the Korotko sounds came up, was discovered during the war. I'm sure majority of you will know about this. So Korotko sounds was actually discovered by a surgeon and not by a cardiologist or by a physician. So this Korotko was working on his own dissertation on war-inflicted wounds, gunshot wounds in the femoral artery, where viability of the limbs post-gunshot wounds. So he attempted all the means which were available, which included auscultation of the vessels above the gunshot and below the gunshot. So he started hearing some sounds which became the Korotko sounds. Something else also is important with regard to the war. I think it was the First World War, Second World War has thrown a lot of inputs to us. More than that, the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and people who died, the soldiers who died in the younger age group, when they underwent autopsy, people found out that at 20s and 30s, they had significant atheromas. So war has contributed, and this is one another thing which I would like to contribute, which I'd like to share. This is World War II. When the Germans confiscated all the animals from the Norway, so the Norwegians ended up eating what was available in the stores. They basically started eating, they could not eat anything non-veg. So they had to have portion control as well as only vegetarian type of food they could eat. I'll wait for the slides. Yeah. So we're talking about Norway and the German occupation of Norway at that time. So the heart disease was ever increasing till 1940 when the Germans took over Norway. Because of the lack of food availability, the heart disease started falling down. By 1945, the heart disease had come down, and when they started eating again their original food, the death started going up. So this was the first illustration to the world that vegetarian food brings down the heart disease. So this was reported in 1951 by Strom and Jensen. The other interesting story which I would like to share, which unfortunately is not taught to any of the postgraduates in cardiology. This is from North Carolina. So we are just traveling to North Carolina now. And North Carolinians are basically jolly people. They're into logging of, wood logs. They have the habit of hunting animals, picking up berries, fishing. This, I'm sure, even now, these are the hobbies which in North Carolina, which is a portion of Finland. And in Finland, in 1973, Finland happened to have the highest number of deaths because of CVD. And interestingly, in Finland, people submitted a petition to the government they wanted a change in the, they wanted to reduce the heart death rate because of the MIs. So what happened was Dr. Pushka was appointed to get into this. And Pushka realized that it was the World War which made the huge difference in the incidence of the heart disease in Finland. So what the government had done is they had given a lot of free lands, freebies, which are a part of, a culture in India. At that time, post-war, all these people were given freebies and animals. So the animals were used to graze the land, and unfortunately, human beings started eating the animals. So everything was full of fat. So once Dr. Pushkar realized it, he found it extremely difficult to change this habit. And the first thing which we did was to form an association. Martha organization, I think most of you must be knowing this. The Martha Association is basically a group of women from the local community. He met with them and started meeting the restaurant owners who were actually flourishing. So slowly they started changing. And one important hint which I would like to share here is the host restaurants could never come out of this habit of supplying non-vegetarian because the people were relishing non-vegetarian. So instead of actually stopping the non-vegetarian, the first step which Pushkar advised was to introduce mushrooms in their diet so that the portion of non-vegetarian which they take came down. So he made arrangements to store berries, and slowly things changed to vegetable-based diet, vegetable and fruit-based diet. And there were frequent contests to give up smoking, and facilities were made for cycling and walking. So in years, the incidence of heart disease and the mortality started coming down. That is a very interesting story. Like the drop was around 84% in North Carolina, and once it was implemented across Finland, it was around 82%. So this is the status. This is the flag of Finland. From 700 deaths out of 1 lakh, it came down to 100 deaths by 1 lakh by 2011. Whereas the Indian statistics in 2016, that number of deaths in 1 lakh individuals is around 272, which is way higher than the world's average of 235. This is a shocker, and it's important to know that we are the people who should show the world how to implement this whole food plant-based diet. So who is going to write the petition? I think we have started doing it. The PAN is also doing a good job right now. The third historical event which I would like to share is the special period of Cuba, which is between 1990 to 1995. So this was the time the USSR disintegrated, and the imports from USSR to Cuba came down. And I think that was the time when the USA imposed a ban on Cuba. And they were literally running short of fertilizers, pesticides, fuel, and everything. So what happened was they started using horses, the trucks, local trams, cycles, and their physical activity went up, their calorie intake came down. And what was important is because of the absence of fertilizers and travel material, because of the lack of fuel, they switched over to basically organic farming. That's the most important thing. So the Cuban president was instrumental in all these things. He said we should become self-sufficient. We should not rely on any others. And of course, he had no other choice because the USSR was not able to supply anything, and US had imposed a ban at that time. So overnight, people became vegans, and most importantly, they became organic vegans. That's the most important thing. And every small area was used for cultivation of vegetables. So the quantity and quality of food changed overnight, and physical activity improved. So 1990 to 1995, there was a significant drop in the deaths due to IHD. But of course, after 1995, things changed. Okay, so let's get back to India and let's see some more facts. So of course, while preparing for this study only, I mean, this presentation only, I learned about this on-target transient trial. So whenever people talk about this, the trials, I mean, especially this particular trial, we know only about the BP regulation. But actually, this had an arm which showed that the dietary modification may have benefits in addition to those seen with the conventional cardiac drugs. Then coming to the pioneers, Dr. Dean Ornish is the one who is well known to all of us. Of course, Dr. Esselstyn and McDougall in a smaller way, because he has got a slightly different way of approach. But it was actually in 1940, it was Lester Morrison who started the entire thing, entire diet-based lifestyle modification. So it was in 1940s when there was literally no medications for any of the heart disease. At that time, he even managed to write two very good books, Low Fat Way to Health and Longer Life, and Dr. Morrison's Heart Saver Program. These are the two very valuable books. And what is important to note is he even managed to follow up the patients for 8 years with his dietary plan, which basically omitted a lot of rich foods like cream, butter, full fat dairy, olives, nuts, avocados, oils, and egg yolks. So he documented a significant mortality reduction in 1940s itself, when absolutely no other treatment was available, and only rest was the advice given to majority of the patients diagnosed to have angina or MI at that time. Then I think it's important we all learn about Nathan Pritikin. Some of you might be knowing, but he's not a doctor. He's an engineer by profession with a lot of patents in engineering, photography, and aeronautics. He himself became he himself was found to have serious heart blocks in when he was 40s, and his lipids were abnormal. His total cholesterol was over 300. And he could not get any means to reduce his lipid profile. The only advice which was given to him was to go easy, just take rest, take naps, and not to go for any work. Pritikin was in no way prepared to accept this. So he kept meeting people, and actually he was ridiculed by the staffs and the doctors alike at that time. So he read about Dr. Lester Morrison, his books, and he changed on his own. He brought down his lipids to 120, and actually he eventually died of some other reason. If I remember right, it was suicide, unfortunately. He has designed plenty of plant-based regimens, and he runs a very successful program. These are his contributions in as books: Live Longer Now, Pritikin Program. I would suggest you to read the fifth one, the Pritikin Edge, which possibly will be of use for the beginners. So this is another successful program. Well, Dr. Dean Ornish, I'm sure all of you will be knowing about the lifestyle heart trial. And interesting thing is, as a medical student, he never liked to be a medical student. He never liked to become a doctor, as many of us, including me, never liked biochemistry. And that was the time when he decided to take a break from the routine. So when he approached his teachers, they all ridiculed him, but he managed to get 1 year off from his routine. So he pleaded his own consultants to give him patients with advanced heart disease. People are reluctant to give up to a first-year student, but then he managed to get, I'm sure, reading the history of Dr. Dean Ornish, how he managed to implement his first program will motivate majority of us. So he went and asked the cardiologists, say that you can just hand over the patients whom you don't want to handle. This is how this program started. So first, initially, he used angiogram to demonstrate that could be a reversal. And now he has stopped doing angiograms. He has been using only a PET scan. And the most important thing is it has progressed to the extent now in USA, Medicare has approved Ornish program. So that's the advance. That's the biggest advance Dean Ornish has managed to give us. And I'm sure there are certain non-medical people also here who can see this Netflix movie, The Game Changers. Well, at that time, yoga was not a very popular stuff. I think it's important as Indians, we should know about how he learned yoga. This is actually the picture shown is Sachidananda Swamigal, Swami Sachidananda, and our Dr. Dean Ornish was not a very religious person to start with. He accidentally met Dr. Dean Ornish in his own house. So the very interesting quote is that Dean Ornish asked him, "Are you a Hindu?" So Pat came the reply. He said, "I'm not a Hindu. I'm here to undo certain things." So that was the most important comment, which made Dr. Dean Ornish take up yoga. And he suffered a lot when he came to India to learn yoga. Unfortunately, he ended up in the Premier Institute in Delhi. I don't want to name that. And he was told that he writes in his book that yoga is these days being treated as is given a stepmotherly treatment in India. That's pretty unfortunate. So he incorporated yoga apart from his whole food plant-based diet, and he advises only a moderate aerobic activity. And last and the most important thing is psychosocial encouragement, or in other words, more love. That's what he preaches. So he has interestingly shown that athiroma can be reversed. I'm not very sure whether the cardiologists in the present day will be able to accept this. Well, I'm sure they will at least accept that it makes people less symptomatic. Plenty of books written by Dr. Dean Ornish. I think the first and the last one will give us more clue as to how to take up our program. Dr. Dean Ornish program for reversal of heart disease and undo it. That the latest book, which is on lifestyle modification. Well, hello. The next person whom I would like to quote is Dr. S.L. Stin, a person with whom we spoke for an hour over the phone here, and he said he was initially we wanted to start off our village project as the prevention project. So at that time, we managed to talk to Dr. S.L. Stin, and he rightly said at that time, do not take up such projects. So always focus on secondary prevention, which is easier and more rewarding than primary and primordial. So I know I fully agree and understand whatever he said, because like our obesity program in the initial stages, in our first program, only 3 attended all the programs. All the sessions out of 11. So that shows the willingness of people to change their lifestyle modification. So S.L. Stin was the person who was instrumental in majority of our changes, what we have done. And he was the person who first demonstrated much before Dr. Dean Ornish did by angiogram that there could be a reversal of atherosclerosis. To quote 2 of his small studies, this is possibly the biggest problem with us, documentation, making larger studies. So if you take both Dr. Dean Ornish and S.L. Stin, this is not a criticism. The studies which they have presented have very less sample size. So this was his first study in 24 patients. And he goes on to quote one single patient in whom he had a significant improvement in 1 year. This patient was a 50-year-old male who had a significant CVD and peripheral vascular disease, in whom the claudication totally disappeared in 1 year. Out of 18 adherent patients, 17 had literally no cardiac events in 12 years. So this was the biggest achievement in his first study. And 4 out of 12 had angiographic reversal. So again, it is important we quote that at this point of time, statins were not available. So whatever change which happened contributed to whole food plant-based nutrition. That's the most important thing which we have to learn here. And there is some change between Esselstyn and Dr. Dean Ornish. Dr. Dean Ornish is not very keen on prescribing our usual medications, whereas Esselstyn asks us to continue the statins and now. And there are a few dietary changes between these two. The second important study which he quotes is on 198 patients, of which 119 had undergone a prior coronary intervention or a CABG, bypass surgery, and 44 had a previous attack. In 4 years of follow-up, 99% of the patients who had adhered to whole food plant-based nutrition avoided any major cardiovascular adverse events. And angina or symptoms resolved or improved in 93%. That's whereas 13 out of 21 non-adherent patients experienced at least one adverse event. So these are the most important pioneers, and I'm very sure there must be very many like this who have not come to the limelight. The third portion is about the person who benefited. I think the person who benefited most is this man, Bill Clinton, who had to undergo first surgery and then subsequently had to undergo stenting. I think he had 2 stents within 5-6 years. 2004, he had surgery and then he had stenting. And at that time, he was told that the rest of the vessels might push him for another surgery. So that was the time when I think he had heard about the China study and he decided to change into a near total plant-based diet. May not be a total one. And there is a comment like this: Bill Clinton became a Bill Clinton in 20 years' time. Well, this is possibly what most of us had been doing before getting into this whole food plant-based nutrition or lifestyle medicine. And unfortunately, majority of the people continue to do. So instead of closing the tab, we have resorted to cleaning the floor. So this is what made us to start this Heart Awareness and Rehabilitation Program, HARP. So in 2019, we had 30 patients, and not all the 30 patients were admitted at one stretch. We had to do it in 5 batches. And unfortunately, we didn't have uniformity in the admission time. That is, some batches had 7 days and some initial batches were there for 10 days. So these are the patients who had either undergone a PCI or a CABG and they were continuing to be symptomatic. And I would possibly say we had advised more than 100 patients and 30 patients only turned up for this program. I don't have a record of how many patients we advised, but I'm sure who were symptomatic were advised, and we could recruit only 30 patients. And usual routine things like basic anthropometry, blood investigations. Initial thing was we had to cut cost. So we resorted to do only basic investigations, and we didn't resort to any of the invasive modality or PET. So we did sugar, renal parameters, lipids, and HbA1c to start with. Endothelial function test was done for all these patients because we had actually invested on endothelial function testing for the village people at that time. So we could do this free of cost for these people. The problem was machine. At times we had problems, and to get people to get it serviced was the initial problem. Now we are doing it successfully. And what was important is, like what ma'am was saying, we had formed a good team at that time. At that time, we didn't have a psychologist in the site, but we had only psychiatrist. I must admit that the involvement of the psychiatrist was not very much acceptable, I would say, because the psychiatrist and psychiatry department as such looks out for patients with MDP, schizophrenia, and all those things, and they are not very keen on looking into this lifestyle modification. That's not possibly a portion, something which their routine. So initially we started calling it as an oil-free diet and dairy-free diet, which nobody wanted to accept. So we slowly, at that time, we didn't know about the lifestyle medicine courses also. So now we have labeled it as whole food plant-based diet. At that time, we used to call it as a oil-free, dairy-free, and HARP diet. So supervised physical activity sessions, early morning yoga sessions, and dietary were the three most important components at that time. So we repeated the anthropometric measures, endothelial function tests, and blood investigations. We could, because it was 7th day, or 10th day, there's no point in doing a HbA1c. So only the sugars and blood pressure were recorded at that time. So it was a very, very difficult task to convince our dietitians that food can be supplied this way, nutrition can be provided this way. After a long struggle for more than a year, I could get them to my fold. So a lot of reading, a lot of references were provided. I had to talk, I had to take lots of sessions for the dietitians. And when we were set, we had to experiment. And we didn't want to do it on the patients. So this is a very learned group of people from one of our PSG sister institutions, namely PSG iTech. We had a good rapport with the principal at that time, and the present principal also is very much supportive. For their meetings, we started supplying this whole food plant-based diet and started seeing their acceptance. So initially for the staff meetings, we started providing this without telling them that we were providing a whole food plant-based diet, which was oil-free. Of course, dairy-free, they came to know because we were not giving any of the plant-based milk at that time. Only person who knew this was the principal. Rest of the people didn't know, and we started getting their feedbacks. Well, the feedback was predominantly good when the consumer was more than 50 years. When they were less than 30 years, they accepted, but once the phase 2 was like this. Initially, we just got a feedback from them. Second thing is, next we told them that this is the diet. We told them they didn't have an oil, it didn't have any processed food in that. Then the feedback was not like the first one. Some of them said, no, we won't take this again. Okay, that's how we started. So like Dr. Dean Ornish, our principal was also eat more. And every meal was preceded by a salad, a colorful salad. And unlimited vegetables and predominantly millet-based or unpolished rice. And what we did was to call their relatives also. So we sort of allotted a separate ward for these people, 7 to 10 people who had refractory symptoms, and one staff nurse was posted all the time, in rotation, of course. And we started allowing the relatives to participate in this program. And on specific timings when the relatives came, the dietitian interacted with them, told them what we are doing. Our cooks had demo sessions for them. We made them to cook. We made them to taste the food on Sundays along with us. So this was the initial program. So this lasted for 10 days to start with. And even though the people benefited, they said it is too long a time. So we had to cut short it to 7 days. And we know that Dean Ornish had run the first program for 21 days. Exercise more from whatever they were doing. So that was supervised exercise, because majority of these people had class 3 to class 4 symptoms on maximum drugs. We never stopped any of the drugs. We continued all the drugs weight bearing and meditation and yoga, whatever they could do, it was promoted to start with. The seniors, that is the first batch, people were invited for the second batch, third batch, and they were asked to interact with the team. Games were promoted, group sessions were, we had a lot of group sessions with each of the team. And most importantly, on the last day, we thought we should teach the relatives on basic life support and some photos, selfie sessions, etc., etc. So we created our own acronym, EASE MORE. Eat more, avoid junk, sleep well, exercise more, meditation and yoga, overcome smoking, relax more, and enjoy more. So some results here. Majority of our patients were between 50 and 70, and one of our patient was less than 40. Majority of them were females. I'm sorry, majority of them were males. And as expected, 3/4 of our patients were diabetics. And interestingly, this is there was a gross reduction in the fasting at the time of discharge. Well, there as majority of people were diabetics, they were actually very scared to take fruits. So that was an initial hesitancy. I think they were prepared to take an oil-free diet. They were prepared to forego milk products because we had enough of other substitutes like local preparations, teas, hibiscus tea, lemon tea, or green tea, all those things we had at that time. But they were very hesitant to take sugars. I'm sorry, they were very hesitant to take fruits at that time. But right from 5th day, they started experiencing mild hypoglycemia or an asymptomatic hypoglycemia by values. So that was something very interesting and astonishing. And actually that motivated our dietitians to follow this diet, because our dietitians were very hesitant to give them fruits. Similar change in postprandial sugar also. And we didn't do a HbA1c at the time of discharge. This HbA1c was at the time of after 6 months. So 17 patients, I forgot to put one more slide here. Of the 30 patients, 8 died in 1 year. So they had significant symptomatic disease. 1 died of a non-cardiac cause, an ovarian tumor. 1 had one committed suicide, and the rest died of cardiac cause. 1 because of heart failure, others because of recurrent ischemic events. So this is month 6 and this is day 1. And you can see the number of, this is HbA1c more than 7. It had come down drastically here. And these were the number of people for whom we could not do either because they died or they lost follow-up. This is something very interesting regarding the LDL at 6 months. So the blue tower shows that the LDL was less than 100 to start with, and subsequently the number of people who had less than 100 actually came down. This is possibly because they were on a full dose of statins to start with, 80 milligrams because, or 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin or atorvastatin to start with. But when they started following this diet and when their LDL had dropped, we did the mistake of actually reducing the statins to 10 milligrams. So this possibly could be the reason for the slight increase in, slight increase is possibly around 5 to 10 milligrams of LDL from their baseline. Well, something about the endothelial function testing. 67% of the patients to start with had, and this is a wrong slide, I'm sorry for that. 67% had an abnormal endothelial function to start with. And the endothelial function improved significantly on the last day. This was done at 1 week of, at the time of discharge. I'm not sure how many of you are exposed to endothelial function, but this is a test called test wherein we measure the reactive hyperemic index with a machine called EndoPAT. Well, we could follow them up only for 6 months, and we didn't follow them up for 1 year. The follow-up, I should admit, was not up to the mark because we had our own limitations. We had a staff nurse calling them, and the problem with the staff nurses is that the attrition rate was very, very high. Attrition rate of the staffs was very high at that time. This is pre-COVID time. It continues to be like that now also. Okay, you can see that 59% of the patients only were following this diet. This is a HARP diet at the end of 1 month. Okay, and which came down to 36% and 31% at the end of 6 months. This, I think we should not take it as a disheartening stuff, because this itself, I think, is an achievement. Physical activity, again, it slowed down from 1 month to 6 months by around 20%. 90% of the people were following at 1 month, whereas at end of 6 months, only 70%. I would say this is again a good achievement. And yoga, to start with, around 60% of the people were following. There is a change in color here. Yes, is this. People were following, 63% were following. And at the end of 6 months, 54% of the people are following. And out of the 30 people, one had become a yoga teacher at the end of 6 months. That is the biggest achievement. And whenever he was the sickest of the lot, and somehow we thought he will not make it because he's highly depressed. It was extremely difficult for us to motivate him. And he possibly followed 10 to 20% of what we taught at the end of the session, that is at the end of 7 days. But at the end of 6 months, he had become a yoga teacher, and he started teaching the school kids by his neighborhood. Well, regarding the complaints in the sense the angina, at the end of 1 month, 9% had. At the end of 6 months, 18% had. Well, a few words about the TMAO. This is regarding the secondary prevention study which I had done. And the TMAO is was done in, I think we did 88, we had 88 people, 44 were healthy controls, and 44 were angiographically proven ischemic heart disease patients. Something about TMAO for people who are not exposed to it. So TMAO is, well, the diet, predominantly non-vegetarian diet, eggs, your meat, including fish. There is no explanation as to why fish has higher TMAO and still is protective. Let's not go into that. But these non-vegetarian substances have high carnitine, choline, and phosphatidylcholine, which when they reach the gut, they're exposed to the gut microbes. The gut microbes have an enzyme called TMA-lyase, and they produce TMA, which gets into the liver, acted upon by the flavin monooxidase in the liver, and they get converted into trimethylamine oxide. So trimethylamine oxide can promote any of this, atherosclerosis by acting on the lipid peroxidation, inflammation, or on the thrombogenic pathway. So I just want to share only 2 things pertaining to the present day's talk. Maybe I'll show this. So coming to the cases alone, I said we had 44 patients, 22 were young, 22 were old, 45 age was the cutoff. You can see that the conventional risk factors, by here what I say is conventional risk factors, that's hypertension or diabetes, cholesterol, and all those things, were not present in 7 out of 44 patients. When you see the TMAO, normal level is less than 6. This is the coronary artery. The green tower represents the coronary artery patients. except out of the 44, except one patient, everybody had an elevated TMAO. That is the most important thing. So suggesting that food is the important culprit for atherosclerosis. So that was the only risk factor which was present in almost all one. So that's what I would like to emphasize here. The present study for which we have received some grants is that food heals. What we are trying to do is here we are measuring the TMAO at the time of admission, that is on his or her own diet following an MI and at the time of discharge, because we have started providing this plant-based whole food plant-based diet for the entire uh, cardiology patients, not for the hospitalized patient, not for the entire hospital patient. It is for the cardiology patients. So this study we have started now recently, but unfortunately it's going very, very slow. The reason is one of the exclusion criteria is fever, and majority of the patients, they either come with a fever even now because of the present virus, or previously because of the COVID, either because, so we could not actually do. So the basic condition is they should stay in the hospital for 5 days without fever and with a lot of other exclusion criteria. The one exclusion criteria which is not allowing us to take the study forward is the febrile episodes. So to summarize, our experience has not been great, but I'm sure we have had a beginning right now. And with the team, we have a full-fledged team with us. Now the dietary team has started accepting this. And with this team, I think we will be able to make some more some more strides in the coming years. So whole food plant-based diet augments the effects of current drug, as you have already seen in some of the studies, and interventional therapy. And it is known to halt or reverse atherosclerosis. So far, we have not made any attempt to study, do a re-angiogram or a PET scan. But whatever little we have done is to show that their endothelial function improves. Well, the message is very, very simple. Prevention is the most important thing, whether it is primary or secondary. So just drugs alone are not going to make a huge difference. The best difference comes out of lifestyle modification, and out of lifestyle modification, diet is the most important thing. And under the diet, the things which are to be consumed more are to be specified to our participants than a negative approach. Just I'd like to wind up, maybe for the people who are already doing this. This is the small story of a dewdrop sitting on a leaf, a big dewdrop, which was visualizing all the small dewdrops down in the floor. And when the sun comes up, what happens is it itself starts shivering. It starts melting. And slowly it comes to the edge of the leaf and looks like it might fall down. It is very, very scared. But what happens is when it falls, it merges with the smaller drops and becomes an ocean. I think people who are already doing a bigger work, I'm very, very sure a lot of people must be doing a better job than what I'm doing here. And it's important we join hands. I think before the session, we were all discussing about how to propagate what we have been doing so far. It's important we join hands and start spreading the message. Thank you. This is a Tamil version of, this is called Inevam Idayam Kaka. Some of you might be knowing Tamil. Join hands to protect heart. This is our vision. Thank you. I'm not sure whether I've actually catered. I'm basically not a dietitian. I'm a cardiologist. And whatever I've been doing is by listening to talks, listening to books, reading books, listening to talks. The only person with whom I have been in touch is Dr. Esselstein, and he guided us in the right way. Now the present program, the polyclinic is for people who don't have a disease, who want to identify whether they are into problems and to prevent. That's our idea. Thank you, Dr. Regina.